Chaos is not merely an external force, it is an interior condition. Human beings often imagine that disorder descends upon them from the outside: political unrest, economic volatility, interpersonal conflict, unexpected crises, the endless demands of modern life. But long before chaos manifests in the world, it takes root within the mind. It begins as confusion, as an unexamined impulse, as a subtle distortion in perception. This inner turbulence is the true battlefield. To rise above chaos, one must confront not only the world, but the self. Maimonides believed that human suffering springs most often from misunderstanding. Misunderstanding of oneself, misunderstanding of the world, misunderstanding of what is truly good. The tragedy of the human condition, as he described in The Guide for the Perplexed, is not that people lack intelligence, but that they rarely use it to understand the deeper architecture of reality. They see fragments rather than the whole. They react instead of reflect. They cling to illusions, then feel abandoned when those illusions fail to sustain them. In times of chaos, the mind seeks shortcuts. It grasps for certainties, even false certainties. It seeks to place blame, to simplify complexities, to invent narratives that soothe rather than illuminate. Yet Maimonides insisted that true peace cannot be built upon falsehood, even comforting falsehood. Peace emerges only when the intellect is aligned with reality and the emotions are tuned to wisdom. Without this alignment, chaos becomes inevitable, because the person is not standing upon firm ground. The primary human dilemma, therefore, is not the chaos itself, but the disorientation it creates. A person begins to ask, "What is happening around me? Why do events unfold in ways I cannot control? Why do my efforts seem to dissolve into confusion? Why do I feel pulled in contradictory directions, unable to rest, unable to see clearly, unable to act with purpose?" These questions are not new. They haunted the scholars of medieval Cordoba as much as they haunt the distracted digital mind of today. The world changes, but the human soul remains remarkably constant. We are always searching for equilibrium, for a place where the mind, heart, and will can move in harmony. But this equilibrium is fragile. A single distortion in thought can ripple outward, turning clarity into doubt. A single unchecked desire can overpower reason. A single misplaced fear can reshape one's entire perception of reality. Maimonides saw chaos not as a metaphysical flaw in the universe, but as a consequence of human imbalance. He argued that the world itself is structured with profound order: natural law, moral law, spiritual law. These are not merely religious ideas, but expressions of a universe governed by coherence. Chaos becomes dominant only when the human being has lost the internal discipline required to live in alignment with that coherence. There is a moment in every life when one feels the ground shift. It may come through personal loss, a broken relationship, the collapse of a dream, or the sudden awareness that the life one is living no longer resembles the life one intended. Such moments confront us with our own vulnerability. They reveal the limits of our control. They force us to acknowledge that we are not sovereign over the world. And in that recognition, fear arises. Fear is the doorway through which chaos enters. Fear narrows the mind. It magnifies threats, diminishes strengths, blinds the intellect, and inflames the imagination. It transforms every uncertainty into a catastrophe and every challenge into an enemy. Under the influence of fear, people act impulsively, judge harshly, and cling to extremes. Maimonides taught that fear is not defeated by courage alone, but by clarity. One must understand what is truly worthy of concern and what is merely a projection of the anxious mind. When a person lacks such clarity, chaos becomes seductive. It provides an emotional narrative. The world is against me. Everything is unstable. Nothing makes sense. These narratives offer a kind of perverse comfort because they simplify reality. They absolve one from responsibility, but they also trap the person within a cycle of confusion. Maimonides' entire philosophical project was an attempt to lift people out of such self-imposed prisons. The deeper dilemma, then, is not external chaos, but internal fragmentation. It is the condition in which the intellect pursues one path, the emotions pull in another, and the body demands yet another direction. It is the condition in which a person feels divided against themselves, unable to unify their desires, convictions, and actions. According to Maimonides, a human being achieves greatness only when the faculties of the soul operate in harmony. Chaos arises when these faculties fall into conflict. To rise above chaos is not to escape the world, but to reorder the self. This requires understanding the purpose of the mind, the role of emotion, the nature of virtue, and the meaning of spiritual discipline. It requires the courage to examine one's own confusion and the patience to cultivate clarity. It requires accepting that chaos is not defeated in a moment, but gradually, through the continual refinement of perception and character. At the heart of the human dilemma lies a simple but profound question: how should a person live? Maimonides believed that this question, properly asked, opens the path to wisdom. For one cannot rise above chaos merely through survival strategies or psychological techniques. One must understand the deeper principles that govern existence. Only then can one live in harmony with them. He insisted that truth is not a luxury reserved for scholars, but a necessity for every human being. Without truth, the mind wanders. Without truth, the emotions become tyrants. Without truth, the will becomes reckless. Truth is the foundation upon which stability is built. And truth, according to Maimonides, is discovered through disciplined inquiry, ethical living, and the continual elevation of the intellect. This does not mean withdrawing from the world. On the contrary, it means engaging the world with greater clarity. It means seeing events not as random disruptions, but as opportunities to cultivate wisdom, resilience, and virtue. It means recognizing that chaos itself can be a teacher when approached with understanding. The human dilemma, therefore, is an invitation. It invites the person to rise from confusion into clarity, from distortion into truth, from fear into understanding. It invites the soul to step into its highest purpose, to align itself with the order that permeates all existence. Maimonides believed that when a human being begins this ascent, even the surrounding chaos loses its power. The world may remain turbulent, but the person is no longer tossed by every wave. They stand rooted in reason, strengthened by virtue, and illuminated by wisdom. This is the beginning of rising above chaos, not the transformation of the world, but the transformation of the self. To understand how to rise above chaos, one must enter the intellectual world of Maimonides. His era was marked by turbulence, no less profound than our own. He lived through exile, political persecution, the collapse of familiar structures, and the uncertainty of wandering from land to land. Yet in the midst of these upheavals, he produced one of the most ordered, rational, and spiritually elevated bodies of thought in human history. His life was testimony to the idea that clarity is possible even when the world is in turmoil. Central to Maimonides' approach is the conviction that chaos begins in the mind, not in external events. In 8 chapters, his introduction to Ethics of the Fathers, he explains that the human soul is composed of multiple faculties: the intellectual, the emotional, the imaginative, and the appetitive. These faculties are not enemies. They are designed to work in harmony. But when one dominates the others without guidance, disorder arises. Thus he identifies chaos not as a mystical force, but as a psychological imbalance. For Maimonides, the intellect is the governing faculty. It is not merely a tool for acquiring information, but the very light of the human soul, the faculty that allows a person to grasp truth, distinguish appearances from reality, and act with deliberate purpose. He insisted that a human being who does not cultivate the intellect lives in a perpetual state of instability, because their actions and emotions lack a unified center. Knowledge, therefore, is not optional. It is essential for the restoration of order. In the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides addressed those who found their faith shaken by philosophical questions, scientific discoveries, and the apparent contradictions between tradition and reason. He described them as perplexed, not because they doubted truth, but because they sought to reconcile conflicting interpretations of reality. To these seekers, he offered a profound insight. Confusion is a sign of intellectual awakening. It means one is questioning the superficial and seeking the essential. Yet he also warned that confusion can become destructive if one dwells in it without direction. The remedy, he wrote, is disciplined inquiry grounded in humility. One must recognize the limits of human understanding while using every capacity available to pursue wisdom. For Maimonides, humility does not mean doubting truth. It means acknowledging that truth is larger than any one perspective. In this way, Maimonides reframed the experience of chaos. Instead of seeing it as a punishment or a flaw in creation, he saw it as an opportunity to deepen one's understanding. A crisis forces a person to re-examine assumptions, confront illusions, and refine their perception. It exposes the fragility of untested beliefs and compels the mind to seek stronger foundations. Thus, chaos becomes a catalyst for intellectual and spiritual growth. The Mishneh Torah, Maimonides' monumental code of Jewish law, reflects this same commitment to order. It is meticulously structured, guiding the reader from the foundations of belief to the intricacies of ethical conduct and communal responsibility. The work embodies his belief that a well-ordered life mirrors a well-ordered mind. Through its careful organization, he teaches that clarity is not accidental. It must be cultivated through consistent discipline. One of Maimonides' most enduring teachings is the doctrine of the golden mean, the idea that virtue is found not in extremes, but in balanced moderation. Anger transformed into cruelty, generosity transformed into extravagance, caution transformed into cowardice. These are examples of how excess leads to imbalance, and imbalance leads to chaos. The golden mean is not about mediocrity. It is about precision. It is about choosing the path that aligns the emotions, the intellect, and the will. In his medical writings, Maimonides applied the same principle to physical health. He believed that the body and mind are deeply interconnected. When one is neglected, the other suffers. Disorders of the body cloud the intellect. Disorders of the mind weaken the body. Thus, he saw health as a holistic harmony, a harmony that modern medicine is once again beginning to recognize. Physical discipline, ethical integrity, and intellectual clarity form a single system. When one part falters, chaos spreads to the others. To rise above chaos, Maimonides insisted on the cultivation of accurate understanding. Misconception is the root of unnecessary suffering. People fear things they do not comprehend, desire things that do not benefit them, and chase illusions that cannot fulfill them. In the absence of understanding, the imagination becomes a tyrant, inventing dangers and promising false hopes. For this reason, he placed so much emphasis on controlling and refining the imaginative faculty. The imagination, he warned, is powerful but unreliable. It gives shape to emotions, fears, and dreams. It inspires creativity but can also distort reality. When left unchecked, it creates exaggerated interpretations of events that lead to fear, anger, and despair. The imagination must therefore be guided by reason, not abandoned, but disciplined, much like a wild horse trained by a skilled rider. When aligned properly, it becomes a force of insight rather than confusion. In describing divine providence, Maimonides offered another profound perspective on chaos. He taught that the more a person aligns their intellect with truth, the more they experience the world as ordered. Providence, in his view, is not arbitrary intervention, but the natural result of living in harmony with the structure of reality. The wise person perceives patterns where the unwise see randomness. The wise person responds deliberately where the unwise react impulsively. Thus, chaos diminishes as understanding increases. Yet Maimonides was not naive. He understood that even the wisest person encounters suffering. But he distinguished between unavoidable suffering, which is built into the nature of the world, and avoidable suffering, which arises from ignorance, poor judgment, or emotional excess. He believed that a significant portion of human pain comes from the latter category. By refining the intellect and cultivating virtue, one reduces self-inflicted suffering and confronts the inevitable with greater courage and composure. One of his most striking assertions is that a person becomes truly human only when they use their intellect to its fullest capacity. This does not mean becoming an academic or a philosopher in the conventional sense. It means living with awareness, practicing discernment, and acting with intention. It means questioning one's impulses, examining one's beliefs, and seeking alignment with truth. A person who lives this way, he argued, becomes less vulnerable to the storms of circumstance. They develop an inner stability that the world cannot easily disrupt. Maimonides' approach to rising above chaos is therefore both practical and profound. It begins with understanding the self, its strengths, its weaknesses, its tendencies toward imbalance. It continues with the cultivation of disciplined thought and ethical action, and it culminates in the pursuit of wisdom, which transforms not only one's understanding of the world, but one's very experience of reality. He believed that the human being is capable of rising step by step, from confusion to clarity, from instability to harmony, from chaos to order. And he believed that this ascent is not only possible, but necessary, for it fulfills the deepest purpose of the human soul. To rise above chaos, according to Maimonides, is not merely to refine one's thinking or to moderate one's emotions. It is to enter a higher mode of existence, a state in which truth becomes the organizing principle of the soul. This transformation is intellectual, moral, and spiritual, each dimension reinforcing the others until the person no longer lives in fragmentation, but in unity. Maimonides saw human life as a journey upward. At the lowest level, a person is governed by impulses, the fleeting desires of the body, the immediate pressures of circumstance, the instinctive reactions to pleasure and pain. At this level, life is chaotic because it is unexamined. One moves without direction, carried by emotion, habit, and imagination. Above this lies the ethical level, where one begins to discipline conduct. A person at this stage recognizes the need for moderation, justice, gratitude, patience, and humility. They learn that character is not fixed but cultivated. They begin to resist destructive impulses and to choose the good intentionally. This is the beginning of order, but it is not yet the summit. Beyond this lies the intellectual level, where the mind seeks understanding of the deeper structure of reality. Here, the person studies, reflects, questions, and refines their perception. They no longer accept things at face value, but search for causes, principles, and truths. This intellectual search, Maimonides believed, is not cold abstraction. It is a spiritual ascent, for to understand the order of creation is to glimpse the wisdom of the Creator. But the highest level, the level that transcends chaos entirely, is what Maimonides called the intellectual love of God. It is the state in which knowledge becomes devotion, contemplation becomes worship, and understanding becomes a form of nearness. This is the synthesis of faith and reason, where the boundaries between thought and spirituality dissolve. Chaos cannot reach the soul that has ascended to this level, because chaos thrives only in confusion, not in clarity. Maimonides' entire philosophical system points toward this synthesis. In his view, the ultimate human purpose is to perceive truth, and this truth is not simply factual accuracy, but the recognition of unity beneath diversity, order beneath appearance, purpose beneath seeming randomness. When the mind perceives this unity, a profound peace arises. It is not the peace of external stability, but the peace of alignment with reality. This is why Maimonides rejected the notion that spiritual growth is achieved through emotional intoxication or irrational leaps of faith. True spiritual elevation, he argued, is grounded in reason. Faith without understanding is fragile. It collapses under pressure, distorts under fear, and hardens into superstition. But faith supported by knowledge becomes stable, luminous, and transformative. The unity of faith and reason is therefore not merely an idea for Maimonides. It is the architecture of the healthy soul. Reason clarifies faith. Faith elevates reason. Reason protects faith from distortion. Faith protects reason from arrogance. When they are united, a person becomes whole. This wholeness produces a spiritual strength that no external chaos can undermine. In The Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides emphasizes that the more one understands the structure of reality, the more one perceives the world as ordered. What seems chaotic to the superficial observer appears coherent to the one who understands causes. Just as a storm seems wild to the sailor, but patterned to the meteorologist, so too the events of life appear chaotic only when the mind lacks depth. When the intellect grasps the deeper currents, fear diminishes. Anxiety loosens its grip. The imagination becomes less tyrannical. One stops interpreting every discomfort as disaster and every uncertainty as threat. This is not indifference, but wisdom, an awareness that the world operates according to universal laws, and that one's well-being depends less on controlling events than on aligning oneself with truth. This alignment is the essence of spirituality for Maimonides. Spiritual life is not primarily about rituals, emotions, or mystical experiences. These have their place, but they are secondary. True spirituality is the elevation of consciousness, the movement from illusion to understanding, from fragmentation to unity, from ego to clarity. Through this elevation, one begins to see the divine in the order of nature, in the structure of morality, in the pursuit of knowledge, and in the refinement of the self. In this sense, rising above chaos is a form of worship. When a person transforms confusion into clarity, they honor the Creator whose wisdom permeates the universe. When they discipline their emotions, they reflect the harmony of creation. When they act ethically, they participate in the divine order. When they seek knowledge, they approach the source of all understanding. Maimonides believed that every dimension of human virtue is, at its root, a spiritual act. This view dissolves the false division between the sacred and the secular. For Maimonides, the laws of nature are divine speech. The principles of logic are divine structure. The pursuit of wisdom is a path toward the divine. Thus, the scientist analyzing the world, the philosopher seeking clarity, and the ethical person cultivating virtue are all engaged in spiritual life, even if they do not use religious language to describe it. This synthesis makes the soul resilient. A person who understands the unity of all things is not easily shaken by the temporary disorder of events. They perceive the currents beneath the waves. They recognize that chaos is often a matter of perspective, that suffering often contains hidden instruction, and that uncertainty can be the doorway to deeper knowledge. Their stability does not depend on external conditions, but on internal alignment. Such a person becomes a source of order in the world. Their speech calms rather than inflames. Their actions clarify rather than confuse. Their presence strengthens rather than destabilizes. Maimonides believed that the wise person becomes like a lantern in a storm. The winds may rage, but the flame remains steady, illuminating the path for others. This spiritual synthesis also heals the fragmentation of the self. The intellect no longer battles the emotions. It guides them. The emotions no longer sabotage the will, they support it. The will no longer undermines the intellect, it follows its illumination. The person becomes unified, and this unity radiates outward into every aspect of life, relationships, work, community, and even how one interprets adversity. Ultimately, Maimonides taught that the soul rises above chaos through knowledge, ethics, and spiritual clarity. These three are not separate paths, but a single ascent. Knowledge without ethics is cold. Ethics without knowledge is blind. Spirituality without either is empty. But when all three are joined, they form a structure as stable as the universe itself. In this state, the person becomes free, not from difficulty, but from the confusion that gives difficulty its power. They encounter the world with composure, act with purpose, and live with understanding. And in that understanding, they experience a peace that chaos cannot touch. To rise above chaos in the modern world, one must translate Maimonides' principles into daily practice. His teachings are not abstractions intended only for scholars. They are tools for navigating uncertainty, restoring inner balance, and cultivating a life of clarity. The question, then, is how to embody this wisdom in the rhythms of ordinary existence. How does one awaken each morning and move through the day with the stability, purpose, and serenity that his philosophy offers? The first step is the cultivation of clarity. Chaos thrives where the mind is scattered. Maimonides insisted that a person must regularly examine their thoughts, just as a physician examines a patient. One asks, what assumptions am I making? What fears are shaping my perception? What desires are influencing my decisions? This practice is not judgment, but illumination. When one identifies the distortions within their thinking, those distortions begin to lose power. A simple daily ritual can support this. Set aside a few minutes each morning to reflect on your state of mind. Not on your tasks or obligations, but on your inner posture. Ask yourself whether your thoughts are aligned with truth or clouded by anxiety. This self-examination slows the mind, introduces order, and prepares the intellect to guide the day. The second step is the discipline of moderation. Maimonides' doctrine of the golden mean is not an abstract ethical theory, but a practical method for stabilizing the emotions. Choose one trait each week, perhaps anger, generosity, patience, humility, or speech, and observe your tendencies. Notice where you lean toward excess or deficiency. Gently steer yourself toward the middle path. This will not only refine your character, but reduce the internal conflicts that give rise to chaos. Moderation also applies to the body. Maimonides saw physical care as essential for intellectual and spiritual health. Regular sleep, balanced eating, movement, and rest are not luxuries, but foundations for clarity. A fatigued body clouds the judgment. A neglected body weakens the will. A disciplined body strengthens both. Commit to small adjustments, earlier rest, mindful eating, a brief daily walk. These simple acts restore equilibrium and prepare the mind for higher pursuits. The third step is intellectual cultivation. For Maimonides, knowledge is the antidote to confusion. This does not require advanced study, only consistent seeking. Choose subjects that elevate your understanding: ethics, science, philosophy, history, wisdom, literature. Read not for entertainment alone, but for illumination. Even a few minutes each day of deliberate, thoughtful study sharpens the intellect and gradually erodes chaos. Knowledge strengthens discernment, and discernment guards the soul from impulsive reactions. But intellectual growth must be paired with humility. Wisdom does not arise from accumulating information, but from refining perception. Approach learning as a conversation with reality, not as a means of proving oneself. Maimonides warned that intellectual pride leads to false certainty, which is another form of chaos. True humility opens the mind to deeper truth, allowing knowledge to become a source of peace rather than tension. The fourth step is emotional regulation. Maimonides understood the emotions not as enemies, but as forces that require guidance. When emotions rule unchecked, chaos follows. When they are disciplined, they become allies. Begin by naming your feelings when they arise. This act of naming, anger, fear, envy, desire, disappointment, creates space between the feeling and the reaction. In that space, the intellect can act. Maimonides recommended gradually training the emotions through repeated practice, not sudden suppression. If you struggle with anger, respond with measured speech. If you struggle with fear, take small, courageous actions. If you struggle with desire, practice restraint in minor matters. Each small victory strengthens the character, reducing the emotional turmoil that fuels chaos. The fifth step is ethical living. Maimonides held that ethical clarity shapes the entire soul. Act with honesty, even when deception seems easier. Speak with kindness, even when irritation arises. Resist the urge to judge others harshly. Give when it benefits another, not when it benefits your ego. Through such actions, the soul becomes orderly. Ethical discipline quiets inner conflict and produces a sense of alignment that chaos cannot disrupt. Ethical clarity also simplifies life. When one acts from principle rather than impulse, decisions become easier. One no longer wastes energy debating between contradictory desires. The will becomes unified, and unity is the foundation of inner peace. The sixth step is intellectual, purposeful prayer or meditation. Maimonides understood prayer not as escape, but as orientation. It is the act of aligning thought with truth and the heart with purpose. Whether through traditional prayer, silent reflection, or contemplative stillness, set aside time each day to elevate the mind. Focus on gratitude, wonder, or the structure of the universe. Let your thoughts rise above the clutter of daily concerns. This is not detachment but recalibration. It restores perspective and anchors the soul. The seventh step is the pursuit of wisdom through action. Knowledge that remains abstract cannot transform the soul. One must apply it. Choose a teaching of Maimonides each week, a principle of moderation, a refinement of speech, a practice of gratitude, a moment of restraint, and bring it into your life deliberately. Through repetition, wisdom becomes habit, habit becomes character, character becomes stability. One of Maimonides' most profound insights is that spiritual growth is gradual. It does not occur through sudden enlightenment, but through consistent discipline. A person who rises above chaos does so through thousands of small acts of clarity, moderation, study, reflection, and ethical choice. The transformation may seem slow, but each step strengthens the architecture of the soul. The eighth step is accepting the limits of control. Maimonides taught that much of human suffering comes from attempting to control what cannot be controlled. Release the belief that you can manage every outcome, predict every event, or prevent every disappointment. Focus instead on what is within your reach, your thoughts, your choices, your virtues, your understanding. When the mind ceases its futile attempt to command the unpredictable, it finds rest. This surrender is not resignation, but wisdom. Finally, embrace the ascent toward higher understanding. Maimonides believed that the greatest human joy is the pursuit of truth. Set aside moments not merely for solving problems, but for contemplating meaning. Reflect on the order of nature, the laws that govern existence, the mystery of consciousness, the moral structure of life. Such contemplation enlarges the mind and lifts it above the narrow concerns that fuel chaos. It connects the soul with a greater order, an order that persists regardless of temporary disruptions. To rise above chaos is not to escape life's difficulties, but to encounter them with a different mind and a different heart. It is to cultivate clarity in thought, moderation in emotion, integrity in action, discipline in the body, and elevation in the spirit. It is to align oneself with the order that Maimonides believed permeates creation. A person who lives in this way becomes unshakable, not indifferent, not detached, but stable. They move with purpose. They speak with intention. They respond with wisdom. Even when circumstances grow turbulent, they do not lose themselves in the storm. They remain rooted in truth, guided by understanding, and illuminated by a sense of unity that chaos cannot dissolve. Maimonides' teachings offer not a refuge from the world, but a way of inhabiting it with strength. They invite us to rise, not above responsibility, but above confusion, not above effort, but above disorientation, not above humanity, but into the fullest expression of it. And when a person reaches this state, the world around them may still fluctuate, but their inner world becomes steady. They discover that peace is not the absence of chaos, but the presence of clarity. And clarity, once cultivated, becomes the light by which one walks through even the darkest of times.